Now to a huge political story in New South Wales, the damning findings of a long-awaited ICAC investigation into former Premier Gladys Berejiklian and her secret boyfriend at the time, Daryl Maguire.
And we can now tell our viewers that report has been published, and we're now getting some of those key findings in the corruption findings against Gladys Berejiklian as well as Daryl Maguire. I'm going to go through some of the ones we've got so far for you. The key finding one. The Commission finds that Ms Berejiklian engaged in serious corrupt conduct by breaching public trust in 2016 and 2017 through exercising her official functions in relation to funding promised and/or awarded to ACTA. So ACTA is the Australian Clay Target Association, in which Daryl Maguire had links to.
It was a story which has dragged on for years and one which has gripped political and media circles. And the ABC rightfully dedicated plenty of airtime to covering the rise and fall of a woman who was once an extremely popular New South Wales Premier.
Thank you.
She's a wonderful person. Gladys Berejiklian, thank you very much.
I've known her for a very long time, and I've always known her to have the highest levels of integrity and to be a very honest person. I never would have thought that Gladys Berejiklian would be the subject to this process. It's not something that would have ever crossed my mind.
So what was the political reaction to this report? Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell was disappointed Labor didn't condemn Berejiklian hard enough.
I think, looking at it from afar on Macquarie Street, a lot of people, including the Premier, are walking on eggshells in the way they're responding to a very clear finding from ICAC today.
I mean, it's almost like they're saying it's okay to be dodgy. I couldn't believe this from Chris Minns either. I think it's gutless. I don't think it's what he really believes either, by the way, but I think he sees the focus group saying there's a lot of sympathy for Gladys and he's thinking about his own political situation.
But not every pundit was as scathing in their assessment of the situation. Former Labor power broker Graham Richardson was highly critical of ICAC itself, arguing the process had gone on for far too long and was unfair to Berejiklian.
She did what she did. She continued on with, you've got to say, the great strength she's always shown. She's a very strong woman. And as I said, I take no glee in what's now happening.
Richardson also made it clear he does not consider her a friend, and in fact he stated that they had a very prickly relationship. His issue with ICAC was the fact that highly personal text messages were published publicly and then it took years to announce a finding. The findings have also not reached a criminal threshold, so Berejiklian will not be charged over any of this. Now, in our view, the findings are clear and Berejiklian's actions were inappropriate. And the media and the public had a right to read some of the disturbing conversations contained in those private text messages. The most powerful person in the state should have equal and proportional scrutiny, particularly when taxpayer funds and grants are at play. That also needs to be balanced, though, by the fact that she has not been convicted in a court and has the right to challenge these findings. Caleb, it's really interesting because this is kind of a test to what you think about Gladys Berejiklian as opposed to the story. She still has a lot of supporters. The findings were quite clear in my opinion, but there are talks even today that she would still be taken up by the coalition to run federally. She still appears to be fairly popular and quite respected.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary, isn't it? Because if you look at it from a media perspective, if you look at the coverage and the commentary around this, it's very clear that Berejiklian is receiving different treatment to perhaps any other politician would, because there is still major goodwill for Gladys Berejiklian. And I think a lot of people look at this and go, well, you know, you had a dodgy boyfriend, he was leading you up the garden path. Having looked at some of those text messages, witnesses and heard the recordings. We feel sorry for you.
He came off quite abusive in some of them and controlling.
He did.
And it's been very strange reading them with the ICAC's explanation underneath.
Correct. And I think people look at it, and the media has also looked at it and said, what is the threshold for corruption? Because you've essentially got an outfit like ICAC which can accuse you of being corrupt without finding you've committed any criminality. How does that work? And I think a lot of people have looked at it in that sense and gone, well, if you haven't committed any criminal acts, you're not corrupt.
But particularly considering that the Andrews government had a corruption finding against them, and the media didn't even bat an eyelid. It was barely even a big story, which is interesting. Kristy, what do you make of this whole saga?
Look, first of all, I think you're right. I think there is significant polling being done. It's certainly a question that would come up in focus groups with the Minns government of how to react to this with the former Premier. There is enormous sympathy for her. I personally felt very upset and aggrieved on her behalf when I read a lot of those text messages and phone call transcripts. A lot of those did not have to be aired in the public domain. She has every right to be extremely upset about that. But of course, I think that yes, to the point you've previously made, it is a report that recommends that misappropriation was made, that misdealings were done, and yet has not recommended criminal charges. I do feel sorry for Gladys. I understand she is mounting some type of defence, but personally, a lot of that personal content didn't have to be aired, and it didn't have to take 18 months to play out in the media for this resolution to be put to us this week.
Yes.